Welcome, everybody. Today, it is August the 16th, and we're talking about the next big EOS hard fork, the Leap 5.0 protocol upgrade. Up on the screen, you can see Brian is sharing the preliminary plan, and I'll hand it over to Brian to talk through where we're at with that.
Excellent. So what we're going to do is I'll give a quick update on what has changed since the last time we talked. Then we'll have a little bit of a more detailed discussion to determine next actions with deferred transactions. And then we'll do some agenda building to see if there are any other topics that people would like to cover. So the first update is that we are still exploring possibilities to try and bring in this date for the instant finality Leap integration milestone here. But as it stands today, the target date is September 29th. Previously, we were relying on that date being a little bit sooner. That was speculative. There wasn't a commitment that it would be sooner, but it was a sort of speculatively hoping it would be sooner. That might still happen, but as it stands now, it has not. What that means is that the plan as it stands today is a bit broken, and there are some things that need to slide out specifically because of this dependency here. Replay test prior to tagging Leap 5.0, and obviously the Leap 5.0 RC1 itself. They depend on that Leap integration of instant finality. So obviously they can't happen before that date. So that boils down to up to 2 weeks of delay on the current plan. I'm hesitant to update it yet because this week some of that exploration is occurring to see if there are ways that we can pull the date in. So I'm going to leave the plan broken at the moment. Next week, we'll either have the dates slid or have a wonderful update that we've been able to pull that back in. So the next thing is just deferred transactions. If you remember last time, we talked about wanting to remove deferred transactions as part of 5.0, and we talked about some ways to de-risk doing that because we don't want to have too many potentially risky items in 5.0 that each individually could sort of blow up simultaneously, right? And so deferred transactions has a fun characteristic, which is that we can simply disable it in configs, and that's what we talked about doing is preemptively disabling deferred transactions well in advance of a 5.0 protocol upgrade. And so that's the topic that I wanted to discuss is, what steps need to occur in order to coordinate disabling deferred transactions. And as far as just to make sure we're all on the same page with very specific details here, it is a config option max scheduled transaction time per block ms or milliseconds equals 0 is how you would be able to disable that. And of course we can put together a more detailed written instructions so that you can refer to those later, but that would be the actual step for an individual node operator to disable deferred transactions. But coordinating for a community of node operators to do so is obviously a little bit more involved. So I'd like to open the floor for suggestions on how that might happen.
A few questions. So it's not an MSIG, right? So this is something that each individual BP has to change the configuration. Is there a minimum threshold of BPs that need to have that, or it's all of the top 21, or even all, what is the target
Right.
that needs to have this change done?
Yeah, let's break that into bits. So the first part, correct. It is not an MSIG. It's just a configuration change that you would individually apply. Yeah, that would disable running deferred transactions. As far as the threshold, yeah, let's talk about that. I think Kevin is on, and Kevin can probably help us with this one.
Yeah, so it would need to be all active BPs to get a true test. Otherwise, any BP, let's say there's one out of the 21 that still had it enabled. Well, during their round, they would then process any deferred transactions. So now, depending on how many deferred transactions are out there, that might be enough to get somebody limping along. So a true test would be all 21 of them to disable it.
Okay, so just has to be
the reason why.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, is there a reason why it won't be enforced by the node EOS itself on 5.0, at least where you have to maybe add an additional flag to enable it versus requiring people to do that to maintain, multiple infrastructures and backup BPs and could easily have one slip away?
Right. So ideally, it'll be enforced in 5.0 simply by code removal, right? Like, because this feature has actually been deprecated for quite a while now. So this would be, actually closing the loop on that deprecation and following through with code removal. The reason to do this in advance is so there's no way to have full confidence and understanding of what the impact of this would be besides, having it removed in some form or fashion. Disabling it via config is one way to do that. Disabling it via, via code in Node.js is another way to do that. And disabling it by actually removing the code that, which is a variation on that option, right? But if we wait until 5.0 deploy for this, then it's one more like point of complexity that we could have gained that information sooner, right? Like we won't know until we roll it out, and we could run into issues that require a patch release on 5.0 because whoops, this is a bigger deal than we intended, that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I was just wondering why, if we're planning to anyway remove deferred transactions, why not any future release starting from whatever next release might come, even pre-5? Why doesn't that already add that to the config or requiring a config? If somebody still needs to use it for MSIG or something else, make it a requirement in the config that you still have to have deferred enabled, regardless of whatever flag you have in the milliseconds. That way, at least anybody who has it before doesn't forget about it. It's forces them to take an action if they want to actually have it enabled.
Assuming they upgrade.
Well, of course, yes.
But it's probably easier to confirm that they've upgraded than
breaking changes in a patch release, right? Unless we're doing a 4.1.
Well, breaking changes, I'll say a couple of things. Number one, I agree with Shaq that I think that it's better off because you've got backup VPs just on your actives. You've got secondary nodes. You've got some chains that are rotating that schedule pretty rapidly. And, so coordinating, is definitely an issue. I'll say that, deprecated has been, deferred has been deprecated for years, but so was V1 history. To be honest, up until last year when we did the hard fork upgrade and we forced all the contracts to get re-centralized and cleaned up and ENF and all that, I think that was last year, whatever it was, it very recently became easy for chains to get away from the system level deferred transactions. Some I don't think even have yet, to be honest with you. But if it's going to be code removed in 5.0, I would think offering a later 4.0 version that disables it by default but allows you to enable it. Because if you're in the scenario you need to enable it, then you can coordinate your BPs. And if they don't, they just don't process deferred transactions, right? I mean, it's not like it's going to brick the chain. It doesn't sound like.
Isn't that sort of 6 and 1/2 dozen the other? Because either way, a node needs to take action either through configuration or through upgrading.
The action of keeping deferred transactions going, which we all believe is a minimal case, but the default case, making the node operation default to not doing deferred transaction prevents a hell of a lot of the ways it's gonna break, versus the few people that intentionally want to run deferred transactions. Go ahead and start pushing people off of the ledge before the code's completely gone. Just do it by default. And then, oh shit, we're not getting deferred transactions. Okay, turn them back on.
I think, Michael, just to try to expedite on this, I think what he's saying is mainly that you still need the users to do an action, whether it's to upgrade the node, to enforce that new change that might be part of it, or to do that config. But I think, like it's much easier to get people to upgrade the node, especially people who are going to participate in this test. Like it's something that's going to be almost like a given, everybody's going to do, and kind of easier to verify, than having to remember when they eventually get to it to upgrade those nodes that, oh, there's this extra step that I need to do also in the config. But it's not a big deal either way. Just my 2 cents on it.
I have a question around like the verifiability of the config change. Is there a way that we can see that the config change has been done, or do we have to rely on the BP self-reporting?
I'd say you could just execute deferred transactions.
See if they go through.
See if they go through.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly just look at any block explorer and see if there's any deferred transactions for a given producer, right, for a given time frame, and that would verify. The idea here is, definitely we could just change the default for deferred transactions in 5.0 to where it's default not there, so that when people upgraded, if they didn't do anything, they would automatically be disabled. Included in 5.0, we could add a protocol feature to turn it off, so that when the protocol feature is enabled, deferred transactions are gone. What our attempt here to do this ahead of time, to do this test, to try to get all the BPs to go ahead and just disable it with their current software, is to get feedback before we do the work of the protocol feature. Because if we do the work of the protocol feature, once the protocol feature is switched, there's no going back. We don't have, at least currently, any way to undo a protocol feature. Now, certainly we could do all that effort. It's just a matter of like, how much do we want to expend on in terms of resources of doing this? So we're hoping to get some feedback right away on, hey, if we can get the BPs to just disable it now, what sort of feedback do we get? If no feedback and everything's fine, then great, we go forward with the protocol feature, we get it in 5.0 or whatever, and then we switch it on in ASAP, no big deal. Certainly we can go the slower route of like, well, change the default type for 5.0, wait for feedback there, then create a protocol feature for 6.0, and then, a year from now, we can get rid of them as opposed to, months from now. So, I mean, that's kind of the way the thought process has gone here.
I think as long as eventually it will be like a feature that's basically going to be like a fork if the node's not aware of that feature. Then and the people that are going to be testing are limited in scope. I don't think it matters much, and might as well take the effort, the path of least effort, as in like delay doing the feature.
Right. Yeah. So the intent is through testing to make code removal a non-event, right? Like, and therefore reduce the amount of risk mitigation that's required, because we already know that it's, it can't be being used, right? Now, I do want to follow that logic of a 4.1 versus just rolling out a config change. So I think the assertion is that it would be easier on node operators and maybe easier to get enough uptake to get a valid test if we rolled this out as a minor version than if we rolled this out as asking for a coordinated configuration update. To invite. Say that again.
I don't see the difference in effort for those two options.
I don't know. I think that
That's what I
say that tagging it with 4.1. I mean, if you're really just kind of wrapping things around this and maybe some other things that you're scoping for, some things that you're really targeting for getting ready for 5.0, it might be good to, if you make a 4.1 and say, hey, look, I mean, 404's a wonderful code and you can keep running that. Maybe a 405, bug fixes, but keeping 4.0 as, now this is the 4.0 stack and it's fine. Anything 4.1, 4.11, 4 whatever is flipping on any of these extra features that may be getting ready for 5.0, may not even be ported over to 5, because they're temporary. But it's, in my opinion, much easier to coordinate. Guys, update your binary, make sure you're running 4.1 and the default doing whatever it needs to do versus making sure everybody has it in their config.
Yeah, it's like a JSON. See a huge amount of engineering effort to create a 4.1 release for very little value. The way to do this is, as somebody said earlier, write a Aloha EOS mechanics thing that just generates a deferred transaction every few seconds. Write a report that shows which BPs executed those transactions, and then go harass them until the report is blank.
Right. You get that pet.
That's the engineering work to do.
As long as that gets done on all the major chains that we're ultimately trying to target in the testing scope. If it's only jungle, easy as pie. If you really want the coalition to do it, you've got several other networks that.
Yeah, but somebody needs to do. To me, that's a lot less engineering work than doing a 4.1 release.
Really? They have to release the code update. You got to release the code update to have the new feature, right? It's got to have a code update. It's either going to be 4.05 or 4.9.
Oh, you're just disabling the config.
But how about this? Sorry, all I was going to say is I believe that if you think of 5.0 and instant finality as the carrot, right? Having to remove deferred transactions, which has been deprecated for a while, right, is the pain, if you will, and not being able to upgrade to 5.0 would be kind of the stick, right? And so I'm thinking about this in two ways. Like, one, what we're talking about on this call, of course, is coordinating 5.0 protocol upgrade for the EOS network and the steps before that, right? There is a separate effort, of course, to do those upgrades on any other Antelope networks that would like to do that upgrade.
And we probably will get the results of the learning we would get just by having one chain.
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking. And I think the pain of having to deal with the fact that deferred transactions has been removed versus the effort involved of getting the benefits of 5.0 more generally is
Are you trying to get the result at the BP node operator level, or are you trying to get the result at the DApp level that's potentially about to lose a feature they're using? Because most chains have deprecated deferred transactions at the system level and probably wouldn't run into many issues. It's the dApps that still have access to them, right, are going to go, oh shit, deferred transactions are gone. I didn't know that was disappearing. Just like the exchanges didn't know V1 history was disappearing.
Yeah, it's an
you should trigger the dApps, and you're not going to jungle. You might have a few because people run shit there, but that's the question.
And that's
for that.
And that's the goal of the discussion, and is so yes, insightful question. ultimately, we are we need to know if problems have been caused for dApps. Like we need to know that. And there's not really a good systematic way to know, right? Like the fact that deferred transactions are still being executed is one thing. It doesn't necessarily tell you whether they are actually necessary, right? Or if they're just superfluous, right? And so
Matthew, does your magic reporting possibly have something about how many deferred transactions are occurring on the network? To get
And from who? Like what smart contracts are triggering them or whatever?
Substreams can do it.
Substreams can do it. I just don't have a report handy.
Curious.
The right one. Yes. Right, but that's what you probably want to see, right? You want to see a report that shows how many deferred transactions are running over the last, I don't know, month or something.
Right.
And then if you can figure out who those are, then go harass those people, ask them some questions.
Right. There's probably a broader communication that has to happen before we shut this off to make sure the apps are aware this is coming and they don't get
Here's the date, and we're going to start turning it off. And then
I assume what you're trying to get. I assume what you're trying to get is the same thing we always get as we, take something away, is to get the coders that have solved a problem by using it, that are about to go, shit, I can't do this, and this was how I got around it. So it's the unique use cases, and that's why I say, I if you want to shotgun at an infrastructure and operational level, absolutely, we can roll it out to jungle, turn some things off, but it feels like.
But until you don't turn it off, then people don't react.
So you need to turn it off in like
that's exactly
testnet or something where there's really active apps that are running that could potentially trigger it, or even go out to a mainnet level because it's not us, it's them.
I think the mainnet's where you're going to get the behavior change. And another way is just pull an Elon Musk, surprise, I disabled the APIs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's what we have in mind right now is Jungle, Kylan, EOS, right? As far as the progression, and
so testing it being disabled on EOS, is that correct? I mean, like coordinating the 21 of us mostly, and okay,
correct. And yes, on the communication side, a certain number of sort of what's the word I'm looking for? As a courtesy, if you will, reaching out to dApps and saying, hey, so one, just publishing something saying like, this is when this is going to be removed. Two, if we're able to track down dApps that are relying on this or seem to be relying on this, then as a courtesy, reaching out and saying like, hey, wanted to make sure you saw this. But ultimately, forcing functions are often required, right? Like a date, like this is when this is going to be disabled. So, make sure you, if you are relying on it, that you find a way not to be relying on it, right?
Or I was going to say, or tell us why it's absolutely required and you absolutely must have it. And
yeah, that's the other side. And that's actually, that's one of the reasons why we're doing this is, it is of course possible that we've missed something here and like we cannot get rid of this. And that's why we don't want to just like bull in a china shop, remove the code, altogether.
So I think you're going to have to rip the Band-Aid. So I don't.
But let's come up with a communication plan.
Yep.
To rip the Band-Aid, so it's not
first round
Musk ripping the Band-Aid.
Dude, I definitely think it's worth. I mean, we can run a report on EOS and see. You can do jungle too, but I just, as I hear it, like say, it's not us that's going to notice it. It's everybody else. And the only way to do that, it's just like V1. I mean, V1 was deprecated for 5 years, and people learned it was going away when you took it away last year.
But that's my point is like, here it might not apply because the date for 5.0 is so close. But in general, if things are going to be depreciated and it's known in advance, you don't make necessarily a special version for it, but any subsequent versions should require just like another flag so that operator knows like this is being depreciated and you're going to have to do something about it eventually. In this case, as I said, it doesn't matter just because like the date is so close. People are not going to be updating multiple binaries by the time 5.0 is there.
So the opportunity here to start warming up the EOS support email list, you know, they've gathered all the contacts of known dApps. Maybe there's some work that has to be done to adjust that. I'm not sure if there's any new or no longer relevant. And I think there's maybe a couple audiences here we have to consider. There's the node operators. So here are the configuration changes you have to do and why. And then to the developers, a blog post maybe on the ENF, hey, we're going to be deprecating deferred transaction. Why? Maybe there's a survey or some way to provide feedback if you are using it and you want to let us know. Hey, I'm using this and I need it, and this is why I need it. Probably makes sense for them to live on the blog. And then an email blast that once that's published, we get that EOS support emails roll in to point everyone to that blog. Sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, and then I was just going to add to this plan is, run a report, see if you can figure out who those people are that are
right. Knock on their doors.
Transaction today. And then, build a deferred transaction simulator thing that will push deferred transactions so we know which BPs are still executing them. And then that will feed into the report that we just created. So then we'll see the deferred transactions running. So then we can have some BPs start turning that off, at the beginning of the messaging, and then eventually all the BPs will eventually turn it off, and then by the date. Yeah.
And maybe periodically is there.
Yeah, so it's just like, what is it, the ES mechanics thing, which, every, 20 seconds or something, submits a...
Now, on the test nets and main nets, I just want to, the trade-off is, do we get additional information and how...
Well, Jungle can be done a lot faster, right? Hey, we're turning it off, and then get the BPs to...
Right, but the point has been made, and I agree with it, that ultimately we won't really learn who's relying on it until we put it on mainnet, right? So the question is, do we get enough additional value by going to test nets with this to warrant the additional coordination required?
But you should go to the test nets first, so the dApps that are actually testing on the test net get less surprised.
Yeah, I guess.
Ideally.
I think the other thing is ultimately we're going to push that out anyway, just so that it's in sync with mainnet. So yeah, okay, fair enough. Okay.
Right, so it shouldn't be too much. I don't know who's going to volunteer for this.
I think
run this synthetic transaction thingy, but if you've written it once, running it on 3 networks versus 1,
Yeah, I'll be happy because I'm not the man to write the script, but happy to blast the cannons.
Of course, that appeals to you.
That's what I do. I'll set up an I9 and smash the shit out of it. What you want?
I think this
been sincere to say hi.
Is the one that I'm not sure. I'm not sure of the level of effort involved in this one.
So James can do it.
It's worth doing even if you can't do it completely. So
yeah,
I'll say this: if there's any of you super nerds that if you had access to a ship node or whatever, I'm happy to expose our EOS and Jungle and Kylan as data sources to let y'all rip on them. I'm just not the man to deserialize a ship fire hose.
All right, so basically just walking this through, we publish a public plan to disable deferred transactions, stating when it's going to happen, right? We message dApps via, I guess, and node operators, really, right? Node operators.
Yeah, and there's probably two separate. I don't know if it's we need a blog post for the node operators or just a private message. I'm not sure. Maybe two blog posts would be good.
Yeah,
One for dApp audience, one for node operator, how to configure, one for apps, how to prepare.
Oh yeah, I
It
guess.
could be one blog post, which
Could be one.
mention for the node operators, probably.
Maybe.
But the blog post, it needs to be long, right? Long. It needs to provide the motivation, what we're doing, what is the timeline, how to report if you're impacted, how to configure it, if you're a node operator. There's a bunch of stuff we need to cover here.
Yeah. But as always, don't bury the lead. Take action now, the first sentence, because if it is long, a lot of people will only read the first paragraph, and unless they have a strong motivation to keep reading.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any point in getting feedback from dApps, because even if like whoever comes back to you and tells you, hey, we need it, like, are you actually going to change the plan? Like, I don't think so. So might as well just explain why it's being done and potentially suggest alternatives if needed.
People feel better if they can have a discussion about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, yes, I have trouble imagining the scenario where we would choose to change the plan, but I don't rule out that it exists. So, yeah,
That sounds like a politician move,
Well, fair enough. Okay. All right. So yeah, public plan, message, develop a report, start doing outreach based on what we can learn from that report. Start submitting synthetic deferred transactions, disable on various networks. Now, yeah, again, I guess we need it on all three of these, right? Okay. Cool.
Right. So once we have the synthetic transaction line 7 there, then we know which BPs we need to harass in line 8, 9, and 10, right? Because we'll still see those transactions going through.
Right.
It's like, hey, you didn't disable.
Fair. Thinking this through from a dependencies perspective, Kevin, is there a last date that would make sense to disable this and still be getting the benefits of doing it early based on?
Well, this plan needs to run pretty quickly, right? In weeks.
Yep.
Can this all get coordinated and run in 2 weeks?
Yeah. I don't think it's so much of a technical dependency as, let's just do one thing at a time and not try to mix, a big upgrade stream with the conversation on deferred transactions, which is better for everybody. As far as timing goes, I think we find some of the apps that are doing the deferred transactions, then we'll get their dates when they're going to make their changes. And that's the only thing I could think of that might set the timeline right.
Well, yeah, again, this is, forcing functions, I think,
Well, we can set the timeline, and then if some dApp comes back with some good reason that we agree with, then we can push the timeline. But we should set the timeline ahead.
Right. Right. I think in a vacuum, it's like, okay, I'll take care of this in 2 years. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Nothing happens.
All right. So just grab.
Because if we're gonna break the biggest decks on EOS or something, then maybe we want to adjust the plan, right? but Joe averages little DApp thing, maybe not, or we break power up or something.
Right.
Can't see that that's happening, but
So I threw a dart at the board here and said September 20th for like the end of this process, right?
and then just work backwards what we need to do.
Right, exactly. Yeah. All right. I think this probably gives me enough to chew on and come back with something. If you have any other feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out on Telegram with that feedback. So, pause this topic. Are there any other urgent, EOS production issues or just technical discussions that people would like to explore on this call?
I said I was going to bring it up in the call this evening. Michael actually mentioned it in the WAX BP call last night. Apparently, he mentioned something about, Kevin, if you guys have got like a matrix that you created of all of the various features in the actual Leap software, something that you use to go back and maybe it's your personal. This is where we were on a conversation last night. We're looking at like the deck inside of a mixing studio, and there are 100 different knobs. And typically we only adjust the knobs when we deliberately when we need something in particular that is broken. There's got to be a way, and that's where Michael said this matrix of all features and settings that we should or shouldn't perhaps turn on. Is there something? Does something like that exist? I know we can go and read all the plugins, etc., and see all the various settings, but where we try to get at on some of the networks is like a solid sort of standard base layer configuration of config that we should be using. And even us operators that have been using the software in various forms over the last 5 years, we're often taken by surprise by some of these cool features. Well, we probably told them and we forgot about them. And, is there a better way for us to realize that, that's quite a good thing that's going to improve the performance? We should probably enable it. I think I explained it right at the end, Mike.
I mean, the short answer is no, right? I mean, some of what Brian's been trying to do, I think, in previous calls is to focus or, try to focus in on that. But no, personally, I think we're probably long overdue on trying to get some of that information out, just in terms of like, if I was running a node, here's what I would here's how I would configure it. The interesting thing about that is we'd probably put that together, and then Matthew would come back and say, well, that's dumb. You do this for that. And we'd say, oh, okay. And, so, yeah, I think there could be some back and forth there for sure, in terms of like, here is a better explanation of like things that, if you're running an API node, how, at least as the developers would assume you would configure it. Or if you're running a BP node, here's how we would assume you would configure that. But no, nothing like that currently exists.
So even if it's not so much as a, sorry.
I was going to say, I think there are many different things involved here. Like there's obviously the system contracts that could enable certain things, but it seems here we're talking more about like plugins or other things. I think the first really thing that should be concentrated on is like the docs on EOS Network. That one, for it to have things like, okay, these are node features that you can enable, such as, compute API, read-only transaction. Each of these will have benefits, kind of costs, as in like additional resources. Does it scale through threading, for example? and examples, ideally, of like these configs go together to make this feature work and allow you potentially, if you want to compute API with unlimited wait time that you use internally, you would set it up that way. If you have that, and then like a version number, which is the minimum version number of the leap binary that enables that feature, that will go a long way in that. And then, as we talked about in previous calls, and Matthew also talked about a lot, is having these, specific configs for, you're running a BP, like depending on the role of the node itself.
So yeah, it's not so much about here is the vanilla config. Yeah, it's more about this is the explanation of all the various knobs on the deck. And this is what they do when you turn them on, and this is where, don't turn this on if you've got this one enabled because it's counterproductive. I know that
we're still learning about some of these new ones. Like I just learned that apparently trickled down from Matthew that on a BP, you should disable all read threads because you're wasting CPU, which may or may not be too impactful, but shit, I'm still finding them. People I talk to every day, and I'm looking at their default config. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to reach out to...
You can't even enable read-only threads in BP node. I tried.
Does it not default to 3 like all the other nodes spun up? Maybe I don't realize that. But anyway, long story short, I'm trying to kind of gather from a lot of, kind of known node operators and try to get a consensus. And in my mind, and maybe I'll build it in an Excel spreadsheet and Ross will collaborate on it. But the idea is almost like a product matrix to know if you're at 314, and I'm going to go to 404. What are all the different things that are either getting deprecated or getting added as a recommendation? I definitely agree with Shaq. I mean, the docs that do kind of detail, like I had to ask Kevin what subjective billing and how that kind of worked. And I mean, after about 5 minutes, the light bulb went off. But, a more descriptive, informative information about each of the features. But for node operators, at least personally, and I think most of the ones that I've worked with, any way to kind of get a bearing on this version, these features came out, even if it's not a default setting. Default settings are great. I'm going to have that. But just to even know, hey, by the way, you should adjust. Like at one point, we shifted in 2.0 from a static last block time offset to a percentage. And we're still dealing with, I just put both of them in there and hope for the best.
You're going back
for the sake of that. And you know what? That's starting to burn me because now I've got chains that are extending their CPU limits. And I'm realizing, shit, I'm capping my blocks at 200 milliseconds because that was the original whatever. Anyway, long story short, even all the way back, which is not as important going back, 3 and 4 and now 5, we're really hitting it hard with new features and, I had on subjective billing. Yeah, the new subjective billing, 4.0 and later, maybe a 3.2 something, but 4.0, whatever, has a whole new mechanic to it, Yes, it needs Shaq's EOS doc article to give a better non-tech spec of it, but just a kind of a summary.
Well, I thought that he was saying it is going to be it's technical documentation.
Yes. I mean, I'm assuming he means like user manual type of thing, and we definitely need to work on that. So people
there's something that already, yeah. And then the other thing that kind of goes hand in hand, I brought it up on a meeting like 3 weeks back. It'd be great if we could get a little guest speaker from the, whether it's yourself, Kevin, or someone else on the team. Hey, these are the features that we're working on, and this is why we're doing it. Because a lot of the time we're finding out stuff on the public release, and whether it's brought up, it'll be in like a side conversation somewhere. I think this is the place, even if it's just a short amount. Say, hey guys, this is the different consensus mechanism that we're going to be implementing in 5, and these are where it could potentially go to, that kind of thing, whatever it may be. Just something to just get us aware of what's coming down the line, and it doesn't have to take up the whole call, and certainly doesn't have to take a whole lot of time from any of the guys on the team. But it'd be awesome to have that information.
Yeah. I mean, we've got 240 something PRs now that we merged in between the 404 and 5. So I have been actually writing scripts to go through all of them and pull them out so that then I can go back into GitHub, annotate them, so we can add more useful information, so we can provide more reporting. There's so much stuff there. I think it's going to take more than one meeting working on it. And the dials and the features, we talked about that too. I think it's good feedback because as an organization, ENF had focused on developers, the DF folks, and the documentation. And you can talk to Nathan; he'll tell you the same. That really atrophied when it came to sort of operators manuals. So I think we got to make some, really add a little bit of love back into that stuff.
With the config, you can easily add a config generator on the docs or some site where you can say like, oh, I want to be an API node. I want to be an API node, and I want to, enable compute, and I want to enable read only. And you kind of check things, and it gives you a suggestion with like placeholders for things like how many threads you want to use or whatever else that may be specific to that machine.
I think an analogy I think we could, and we've been having these discussions, obviously, prior to sort of switching topics a bit. And you should also know that like one of the goals that I have in mind for sort of post 5.0 stuff does center around ease of use. Some of that not just because like I want to make node operator lives better, but also for things like it's difficult to coordinate getting exchanges to do an upgrade and stuff like that, right? Like the easier we can make that, the more effective we could be at sort of innovating on Leap's capabilities. Where was I going with this? Oh, but an analogy I wanted to sort of bring up is that we're tool makers and we know all the features of the tool, right? But you're woodworkers, right? And about how you use the tool. So I think it does need to be collaborative. So like, yeah, we could put together sort of configuration generator thing, sort of it's speculatively how we think it should be used. But you're going to have boots on the ground knowledge that says, actually, this is how it should be used, and here's why, right? Like, and that was the purpose of the conversation theme we had around like node types in the past. We didn't follow that conversation all the way through, and would need to circle back on some of that. But yes, and configuration generator in particular is a solution that we've discussed and might be a way forward. We've also talked about more special purpose binaries as either complementary or alternative solution for that. In all of these cases, documentation needs to be improved for sure.
And documentation is not that like difficult, but it's a lot of documentation. So you need somebody who, read everything that has to do with these features and can at least put the skeleton of everything. And then people can come in and the more specialist in that feature can overview it and make sure, that they edit some things that may be inaccurate or incomplete. And that could be like a way, like if NS James, I think, is the one doing the docs now. Like, I might be wrong, but whomever it is, like having like the docs.eos network, like having that just updated with just all the features, even a placeholder, and allowing even the community. Like I use almost all these features, and I'm familiar with a lot of settings, like because I write DApps and I run the node operation, so I get kind of a view from both these places. But there's no way for me to go add information. So if you make it kind of like an authorized wiki or a permissioned wiki or something where you guys can lay the skeleton and allow contributors to make suggestions or edits that get reviewed by people who are assigned that section of that wiki, for example.
Right. Yeah, we can just add it as a markdown file. You can do a pull request against it, and we'll take that and put it on docs.
That's perfect.
Right. So Brian, I'll take that as action, and I'll talk to Nathan about putting up something, at least a page. It was just hello world.
I do want to back up and better understand the request that started the conversation a bit. So you want to know, there's a little bit of like a 5 whys thing here I want to do, but like, so you want to know the features that are released in each version and the associated, I guess, affordances for using them, whether that's configuration or something else. So I think one thing that points to is that, like, as a first step, like, that information ideally should be in the release notes, which, as a best effort, we intend that they are already. That doesn't mean they like everything.
It's great that it's in the release notes, but those get lost very, very easy, in my opinion. I mean, even
and
I can't keep up with that.
So that's the next thing. Yes. So it sounds like what you're asking for, because the release notes are even with whatever missing details there are, they're still very verbose. There's a lot of information in them, right? So it sounds like you're looking for the roll up that shows you across many releases.
Yes.
What
the operator manual.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Not necessarily the deployment guide, though that maybe there'll be some hints inside about how to deploy it, but the operator manual. This is the mixing deck that we've got. This knob does this button does this button does this,
Yep.
And as an analogy.
What will this allow you to do, just so that I can understand the value?
Well, from my perspective, it would enable me to make use of all the cool features and amazing development that's taking place. Because I'll tell you right now, guilty, I run stuff based on my experience and what I know that works. And I only necessarily go and change something when I'm forced to, because there is a change in the software that's not supported, or there's something broken on the network that involves some changes. I'm not just running around flicking switches. If there isn't a specific call for it, but maybe there is a call. Hey, this is going to make your API so much lower on resources. Oh, really? Oh, let me enable that. Yes, definitely.
Well, I think it's twofold. One is, more information about it. I was talking about kind of a summary for just like node operators, but the conversation evolved to, I think, the bigger, the EOS docs and just having more, whatever. That also led to Shaq and Eric having the chat about it. Your community is happy to provide you a lot of that in life lessons that we've learned. If there were some sort of contribution mechanism through GitHub as a markup, sounds like that helps facilitate. Let's get the docs better. Get y'all provide some framework, y'all have oversight, but then even allow a mechanism to, when we learn something, we can go submit it as a PR and it can get added into the EOS docs. So it's not always you guys have to make that. It can just be notes. I think it's how I understood it, kind of an evolution.
The way I see it is an advantage for both the node operators and the dApps, and the page needs to relate to both so they can pressure each other. So meaning that, like, say I see like, okay, version, 3.1, 3.2, 4.05, and I see that, and I see all new features added. For every feature, I can see like advantages for node operators, advantages for dApps, and each one can kind of read the section and put pressure on their node operators on whatever chain to enable that and explain the benefits. And I think that's really not that difficult. Like, what you could do is initially just aggregate all the release notes and put that as like the initial hello world of that kind of markdown, which I agree with you is exhaustive. But say I'm setting up a compute API, I need to go find that specific release that talks a bit about it, and then might even have to look at the code a bit. So having that in like almost one page, obviously with good search and all that fun stuff and filtering, and be able to just see that and allow users to add content to it and FAQ and whatever else might be needed, will just make things so much easier and make everybody aware that like adapt. I'm like, oh, wow, I can use these read-only transactions, which we can now use to, get enums or constants or things that we don't necessarily want to do tables for in a contract, for example.
I know we're at the end. I'd say this, maybe if you guys can, focus on the doc side of things, and filling out all the features and markup submissions and stuff like that. Me and maybe some of my other technical compadres I'm going to throw something together of like just even a Google sheet of kind of that matrix I'm talking about. But if y'all have the details and like say, Ross and I don't know why we should be turning them on or even what the hell to turn on. The dApps don't even know new endpoints exist and why they should say, hey, idiots, why don't you have this on?
Yeah, that's good feedback. Thank you.
I think there's also another thing is that there's the level of detail that we do put out with, hey, it's all in GitHub or it's all in the pull request is so fine that we need something that's aggregated at a higher level, right? Which is really shouting out like these are the chapter titles for all the awesome stuff that's in Leap. And I think that's good for us here in this call, but I also think it's good for people who aren't even operating, in Leap or Node EOS, and they'll see, oh wow, it has all this cool stuff that's great with enough technical details that you can see, oh, this is a real thing, and read-only transactions.
Yeah, as I understand, it's really hard. Like right now, you can print a default config and basically get like a 1, maybe 2 line geek explanation of what all of them together. You don't even always see, hey, this one and this one are related. So having some of that in user manual, but yes, from a node.
Yeah, that's the point Ross was making, like having exactly Node EOS -- help on the website, where each option that you can put there, or each key or each item has some sort of explanation outside Node EOS, and potentially how that explanation might have changed or depreciated between versions.
Bingo. And even if it's a placeholder, we can start somewhere and, shit, I forgot this. I should go update the docs. Here's a PR. I love it. Progress.
Yeah, I think Michael, I think it seems like you, Ross, and Shaq are the most vocal about this. How about we start a group real quick to discuss sort of next actions and who's going to take them on Telegram. I mean,
I'm on board. Let's do a working group. But yeah, it's obviously a pet project of mine, and it does apply. There are several networks that are also looking at it as well. So not even just an individual node operator. I mean, everybody's kind of looking for guidance.
Very good. Well, thanks everyone. We are a bit over time, so I think we should probably wrap up. Daniel, do you want to close this out?
Happy to. Just one last thing, going back to the first topic, and given the time crunch, do we have anyone assigned to, I guess ENF will be taking care of the blog post to let people know that depreciation of the deferred transactions is coming?
I'll take a first stab at that.
I can coordinate with the support guys to start warming up the email plan to, once that blog post is posted, send out some emails and see what we can do about knocking on some doors.
All right.
Cool. All right.
Cheers, team.
Have a great day, everybody.
Cheers. I'm not.
Bye, guys.